be a better way.
There must be a better way.
Must be.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of There Must Be a Better Way, the podcast. Today is a very exciting episode because we have a special guest joining us, Mr. John Mancini. John is one of the most recognizable names in information and document management. As a well-known author and former president of AIIM, he has had a front row seat to the evolution of document management, digital transformation, and now AI. There are very few people who have witnessed as many changes in information management over the years who are as passionate about the subject as we are. So we're really looking forward to getting John's perspective on what's changed, what hasn't, and where things might be going next. John, welcome to There Must Be a Better Way.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Nice to be here. I apologize. I have a little bit of a cold, so if all of a sudden I launch off into some sort of coughing exercise, then just bear with me and be glad you're not in the same room with me.
Well, that is the beauty of these kind of things online, isn't it? So today's episode is all about the past, present, and future of document management. I have a few questions prepared, and we're going to start by aiming them off at you, John, and then we'll let Treve and Niall come in with their perspective. But today is all about you.
All
right. Question 1. What did people think about document management? What did they think it would become 20 or 30 years ago? And did that vision come true?
Okay. Couple things. One is that we had this weird idea of a nirvana of a paperless office. And I remember I ran into a guy when I first took the job at AIIM, and he said, I used to work at AIIM back in the 1980s. And I said, oh my goodness, what did you do at AIIM back in the 1980s? And he said, I ran a conference on the paperless office. Needless to say, the paperless office, great idea. Certainly something achievable in a technical sense, but practically, given people's affection for paper and affection for documents and the inability to really address on a day-to-day basis how people behave, it was impractical. It wasn't going to happen. And so we had that idea, and it was something that just never really manifested itself. I think the second thing that occurs to me is that once we started getting rolling with ECM and content management, we had this idea that some gigantic monolithic platform would rule them all. And so back in the 90s and 2000s, you saw all the big vendors acquiring all sorts of capabilities to kind of have a one-stop shop. A lot of them never really integrated all those capabilities into one-stop. But the idea was one platform to rule them all. And the reality was that never really came about, mainly because the price points that people were willing to tolerate to solve very, very critical mission critical business problems, like new drug applications and stuff like that. Those were not price points they were willing to put up with for everyday knowledge workers. And so the economic model kind of fell apart at that point. The third thing is that we went through a period in which we thought SharePoint would fix everything. And certainly SharePoint, that was part of the revolution that changed the price points associated with these technologies. But SharePoint became a problem of its own because nobody gave any thought to the fourth issue, which is that ultimately this isn't really about technology. It is all about people and how people use technology. And if you don't address the people part, you're never really going to be able to get at the place that you really want to go to, which is information that's managed in an intelligent way.
Do you think with hindsight that could have been different? Like it seems sort of some obvious, well, actually it doesn't seem obvious these days because everyone's still in the same hole, aren't they? They're all still dealing with the same problems, but you would thought there might have been some clever brains at some point that said, well, maybe let's manage information differently. And I guess you could say that they have done when it comes to movies or songs, Spotify or Netflix, that sort of thing. They didn't say, let's manage our information in folders. They said, let's use metadata.
Yeah, and I think the challenge was that when it came to the way that people work, which is, that's a really hard thing to change. Even now where we have the technical capabilities where we can do things differently than we once did. You go into a place and try to change the way people work. you're going to get a lot of resistance along the way. And so that has been a challenge all along, because this is important stuff. And it's also stuff that historically is a different kind of IT skill set than managing a database. Content and documents and records. It's always been this kind of like weird redheaded stepchild of the technology business. And there's a lot changing now that allows it to be much more mainstream than it once was. Metadata you mentioned and using that as the focus of how you manage these things is a big part of it. But I think, historically what has happened is that people have deployed these systems. They've loaded something else on top of it. They've loaded something else on top of that. They've loaded something else on top of that, and never really kind of addressed the inconsistencies.
When I got involved in document management back about 15 years ago, obviously our knowledge now, everyone's knowledge, with experience and the mistakes and the gray hairs. But one of the things that occurred to me very, very quickly was that the IT function was driving the change, because the perception was that document management or information management was an IT problem. Whereas we started to realize actually it was a business issue as opposed to an IT issue. And when it became something on the IT whiteboard, that's when the problem started to occur, because just because it works doesn't mean it works, if you know what I mean. Just because it works technically doesn't mean it works for the business users who have to use the solution day in, day out. And it occurs to me even now that, document management has kind of fallen between the cracks in a way, because corporate management haven't really, I don't think, properly cottoned on to the fact is that this is really, really important stuff. Mm. And I think they devalue its importance to the organization. And I think that's a big missed opportunity. And I'm not just saying it from a value-added reseller sitting here, and we're obviously trying to sell document management solutions. Like, I'll give you an example. Today, we were at an existing client and we rolled out an AP solution for them about 5 years ago. So, scanning invoices, extracting the data and storing them in a document management system. And we've a great relationship with the client. And, we've gone through a couple of upgrades in that time period. And we had a chat about 6 months ago. We said, look, we've got a new HR manager and we're kind of struggling with managing contracts. It's all very manual. We've got lots of different locations, and we have to literally bring a physical folder around to get things signed and employment contracts and whatnot. So anyway, long story short, we presented this week the proposal to just help a little bit with the first iteration of a HR solution. And even by his own admission, and he's a really great guy, he goes, I know what the AP solution saved me, because I could quantify in time, by processing an invoice versus the manual way to this. He goes, I'm sure this is really great value, and I'm sure this is really going to save us time, but I just can't put any kind of shape on it in my head, which was kind of interesting. And again, going back to my point, I just wonder, has it kind of fallen between the cracks, the whole document information management thing being an IT problem, or a business problem, and actually, a missed opportunity?
Well, yeah, I think it is a missed opportunity. I mean, it's funny. You could, with all the time that I was at AIIM, you could track down just about any content management solution provider salesperson. And they almost had this little religious litany that they would go through, which was that, 80% of the information in an organization is unstructured in nature, is usually in the purview of knowledge workers, and is largely unmanaged and is kind of the Wild West of information management in an organization. True. It was actually a data point that nobody had any real source for, which was kind of interesting. I offered a bounty at one point, and I said, somebody produced to me the study that had this 80% number in there, and offered money for somebody that could, and nobody could. It was a mysterious Coopers and Lybrand study that everybody referred to that nobody could produce. And but the reality is that it rings true. And it's that unmanaged part now, when you start thinking about the future And you start thinking about, where the space is going, and you start thinking about AI, and you start thinking about all of that. That's where an enormous source of untapped value in organizations is. How do you get your arms around that information? And so I think we have an unusual opportunity as vendors, as end users, as knowledge workers, to finally get management attention on the importance of doing this in an intelligent way. And we haven't always had that. And shame on us if we don't strike at it right now.
Are you talking about like the context element required for AI models to work best, whether it be a large or small language model?
It doesn't work without context. And when you start thinking about metadata, you start thinking about, some of the places where the industry has gone in the last couple of years. That's at the core of information in context. And if we can convince people that we're critical to solving that equation, there's a lot of opportunity as people, make a whole lot of new mistakes with AI and they kind of go down the next frontier.
That should be a t-shirt. It's all about context, dummy. You should get a t-shirt done up with that designed. It's all about context, dummy.
So is because, a document, for example, just take the simplest form of content that we manage. A document exists as a static thing, but it also exists as a dynamic thing that occurs in a lot of different contexts. And so, something in an HR context is very different than a legal context, is very different than a financial context. And that's one of the reasons I think why each of those systems have tended to create themselves separately, because we didn't do a good job of understanding the context. And if we can understand the context, I think then we have a much better chance of making our case to management as to why this is important.
Who would have thought boring old document management is now coming back into vogue because of of AI? But it's true. It's
it is very true. It's there's so many aspects of this that are both scary as hell in terms of AI and kind of what the implications are and how prepared or unprepared people are to take advantage of those technologies. But there's also a host of challenges that the scale defeated us in the past, and we couldn't get our arms around the enormity of the problem that we had. And AI kind of gives you that ability. I remember, now we talked about this when we were together. I do a lot of work in family history and genealogy stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been transcribing a bunch of diaries from my wife's great grandmother. And, intelligent character recognition has always been something that it just sucked. It's terrible. And, unless you had those nice little constrained boxes in which people put characters in and stuff, and, machines couldn't make intelligence out of that information. They can now.
Yeah.
And it's astonishing to me how that has changed in just 2 or 3 years. You think about that and think about all the different manifestations of that. That means we can do better at categorizing documents. That means we can do better at extracting information from those documents. That means that we don't necessarily have to rely on old models of machine learning, but allow the machine itself to understand what the context is. And that's so powerful when you think about where this is all going. But it's also a big challenge because it starts with a commitment to manage information intelligently.
Yeah.
A willingness to put the resources and disciplines around doing it in an intelligent way.
Well, I think it's trusted information. So we talk about, and we've talked before about ERP or structured databases, whether it be CRM or ERP, whatever it might be, and how a customer wouldn't accept that there were 17 copies of the same record in their ERP system. It would be chaos, well, which one of these do we invoice or get invoices from? But they accept it in their unstructured data. Well, obviously, we're going to have 17 copies of the same document in SharePoint. It's just the way it works. It's a folder system. So when you talk about AI and you talk about, or actually it doesn't even have to be AI, it can just be humans finding a piece of content and understanding whether it's trusted or truthful or not. And when you move that on to as you say, John, when you start looking at scale, if you want to use a large language model across your content at scale, got to be trusted content. And once again, that's where it comes to a single source of truth. There's only one version of a document. It's got good metadata. It's related to the structured data objects. It's trusted, and so important.
I think that's a really good point, Treve, because that question of authenticity and trust, I mean, we see it all the time in the political context right now in terms of all the fake information that's being populated out there. But it doesn't have to be as malicious at that. It gets back to the problem that you said, which is you have 17 copies in various SharePoint repositories, and you can't figure out which is real and which is latest and which is the right one and all that stuff. Those are important issues as you move forward in terms of building a reliable base of trust for information management and for AI initiatives within an organization. Because if you don't solve that, you're going to get a lot of resistance. Everybody talks about the perils of AI from a hallucinating kind of, thing that comes up with crazy conclusions and all that stuff. There's been a lot of studies that look at that, and it's not really so much that. It's, in a business context, certainly in a broader context, it's an issue. But in a business context, pointing at internal vetted troves of documents, the real question is the one that Treve, you said earlier, is what's real, what's authentic, what's current, what's relevant, all those things.
I think if there's a slight breach of trust, or even any kind of breach of trust, whether it be slight or large, if a result comes that turns out to be incorrect, confidence is lost. I believe confidence is lost, and it's incredibly difficult to bring it back. It can't just be left to the middle management to decide, we've gone through a procurement process, we've done evaluations on this piece of software, et cetera, et cetera. It's much bigger than that now. Yes. Because if you're letting AI loose in your information, business information or otherwise, you just can't do it if that information isn't trusted. And if management aren't willing to invest, and John, you just mentioned the word investment, if they're not willing to invest to sort out the layers upon layers of, untrusted information that's being put on top of untrusted information and documents, and if they don't finally decide how this should be governed, if they do implement AI, it's not going to be successful. And also it may not be trusted. And then they might abandon ship, if you know what I mean, decide, hang on, we can't do this. This isn't working. We can't rely on the results that were happening. And that's my fear, is that it will come to a situation where the cart has been put before the horse and they realize, hang on, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. But actually it does work if they prepare it right. So you don't go and paint a room and you open a tin of paint and you start painting. Okay. You prepare the room, you put covering down. It's probably a silly analogy, but you don't just go tear along into it to say, well, I want to, there's groundwork that kind of needs to be done. And I feel that that's been completely overlooked. And the conversations that we're kind of having with certain organizations it's just literally cut to the chase. We just want to implement AI. And we're like, there's steps you need to go through. You need to have governance and guardrails and ensure that your information is correct, et cetera, et cetera. And the investment bit is, I think, is the key. And I'll give you another example. I was talking to a value-added reseller at a conference we were exhibiting, and he did cybersecurity. Obviously, with what's happening in the global economy and stuff, it has a knock-on effect in terms of investment decisions. They can be paused, they can be delayed, and, uncertainty is not good for business. So I said, how's business for you? He goes, oh, we're booming. Booming. I went, really? And he goes, absolutely booming. He goes, because if you think of cybersecurity, it's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And that will always get signed off because everyone's always fearful of a breach, a data breach or some kind of malware or ransomware. So he said, we're absolutely booming. And it just occurred to me that management will make these decisions, or whoever makes these decisions, rightly so, to put in proper cybersecurity. But yet they're not making the decisions to actually sort out the information where all the value actually is. So it's kind of an anomaly there that I think that there's a jump that needs to be made in the mindset of management globally. Because I talked to Treve in New Zealand, I talked to people in the States, I talked to people in the UK. In Ireland, it's the same. It's the same.
Well, and I think that mindset question now, I think is really important in a lot of ways as we move into trying to use machines to process information at scale, because we tend to hold machines to more unrealistic expectations than we do humans. So you have some hungover knowledge worker working at categorizing documents kind of coming across their desk. And, there's a certain error rate associated with that we don't like to admit. And yet, if something is miscategorized in a software environment by some AI engine, it's Katie bar the door. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a disaster. Why didn't anybody see this coming? How can we rely on these machines? And it's, it's the same dynamic that exists when people first started talking about autonomous cars. Is like, Lord help us, an autonomous car crashes and it's on the front page of all the newspapers around the world. People crash all the time, and it's like, oh, well, it is what it is. So I think there's a mindset that exists because it's natural to want to blame someone rather than something. And it's also, these are not perfect engines. And so you need to be very deliberate about, where you strike your use cases, how you think about how you're going to test this out, how are you going to educate people as to the plus and minuses. All those things are very different than just, strapping an AI thing onto the top of what you do and hoping for the best.
John, can I ask you a question? And I'm probably stealing Mackenzie's thunder here in terms of one of the questions. Do you get a sense or a feeling that AI change is different than a lot of the other advancements or new things? Do you get a sense that this is slightly different, slightly bigger?
I think yes. First, it's the nature of the technology in that it's bigger itself, but also it doesn't have the ramp up requirements that we had in all the other eras that have come before it. So, we went through the PC era, then we went through the internet era, then the mobile era, then the cloud era, then the SaaS era. But each of those things makes it easier for whatever comes after that. And so that clock speed just goes crazy. And so AI on its own, I think, is a gigantic sea change in terms of how it's going to impact jobs and impact work and how work is processed and how documents are processed and the role of documents, all those kinds of things. But it's occurring at breakneck speed. You think about, we only started talking about this. I know it's been around for much longer than this. Only started talking about this in November of 2022 when I can still remember that. I remember my son, who's a venture capitalist, runs a hedge fund kind of thing. He said, Dad, take a look at this ChatGPT thing. And I was like, holy moly, this is different. And what made it different at the time was the conversational aspect of it, which is only just a tiny piece of what makes it different. But you think about, kind of that clock speed going from that to 100 million users within like 3 months. Wow. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. It's crazy time.
Definitely is different.
I feel like this plays very much into my second question, which I feel we've probably already answered, but I'm interested to know if you have a different answer, which is what do people misunderstand most about AI and its relationship with information management right now? But we spoke a little bit about how AI needs that context, but I'm interested to see if you have another perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ties with what Niall was talking about earlier, which is this notion that you can't just add AI as this like weird layer overlay onto things and hope for the best. We've always talked about garbage in, garbage out. We've always talked about the importance of governance within repositories. We've always talked about the challenges of duplicate files and content spread and kind of all those things. Those are all issues that are much, much more important now than they were before. And it's kind of like a weird sort of yin and yang kind of thing where AI capabilities can help us address some of those problems, but it also can make some of those problems worse. So there's a real challenge in there, I think, moving forward. There's opportunities because, documents have always been at the heart of what business processes are all about. And to the extent that you can automate business processes, you can create real lasting value for your organization. And AI can help business processes be something very different than they are now.
I think what we're saying, like Mackensie and I were at a conference and there were a lot of government officials there. It was sort of kind of a bit highfalutin really, but all the conversations we're having is around we want AI in our business, but we don't know how to do it. And I think that's a big problem as well. So when you get the decision makers that maybe do see the value and say, look, I don't want my staff wasting all that time. I want to make them more efficient so I don't have to hire more. But how do we do it? And I think that's a big problem. Even if they all came to us, right? If in Ireland they all went to Niall and said, help us, with our AI problem, and if they all came in New Zealand to DocSmart, we'd go, well, it's a big thing. Like, these are big projects, unfortunately, if you actually really do want to tame the chaos so that you can enhance your business and compete in a difficult environment. You've got to put some time and effort into this thing, and we're absolutely here to help. But it's almost undoing the last 20 or 30 years of chaos to try and get some sort of sense around it. Luckily, with M-Files, we have some very, very clever ways of helping people tame that chaos.
Yeah, and I think, with M-Files' emphasis on metadata, at an earlier stage than a lot of folks, I think was a really key differentiator for them in terms of positioning for the future. And, when I think about the challenges that organizations have right now, a lot of it has to do with how rapidly these technologies have been consumerized, at least at the surface level. So that's a big challenge because, when I mentioned my Chat GPT example from November of 2022, that was going on in a gazillion companies around the world that, some CEO was like, why the hell can't we do this? Why can our system not work like this? All that. And now knowledge workers, at home, they're using it. Their kids are using it. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's this, it's that, it's everything. And, it's like this huge, difficult to understand mass. And I think the challenge for really effective business leaders is to take all of that that's going on, to understand the core of what their business is all about, to understand the core of what their business processes are all about, and help their organizations map that into the opportunities that are out there right now. Because otherwise, it's just chaos and nutty stuff all over the place.
Mind you, there's also day forward as well, isn't there? Like, maybe you don't have to go and tame the last 20 years. Maybe you should be setting your business up for the next 5 to 10 years. Why don't we just actually get good metadata now on content that's going in, so that, and that's more relevant content as well. Like, no one's going to want to put a semantic index across 20 terabytes of data that's old and is not relevant anymore. So why don't we just sort of draw a line in the sand and say, well, let's sort out the future.
Yeah, my son has this theory when he thinks about technology evolution, where he talks about you have kind of systems, and then you have things that become utilities, and then you have things that become applications. And technologies tend to sort of morph through those phases. And the real key when you start looking at technologies is, where does the value accrue, and what is the vendor set that ultimately capitalizes on that value? And the challenge over the last couple waves, going to the cloud and going to search and going to mobile is been that those layers are all kind of collapsing, on each other. But I still think ultimately in AI, there's going to be a couple of big platform players that are going to kind of rule the roost. There's going to be a set of secondary platform players, probably guys like we know in our industry that do document management, stuff like that. And then there's going to be a set of people that really figure out that application set and capitalize on that in particular industries and particular work processes. And it's going to be fascinating to watch. I don't know where it exactly will all wind up, but it's coming pretty quick.
You mentioned speed, and I was just thinking, John, you said like November 2022 and then 100 million users. But if you think about the exponential proliferation of information that these models have gotten and get now because of everyone using the models and the information growing, it obviously is an opportunity. But I don't know if you remember, in Dublin, Bernhard ran a test. Do you remember that in the afternoon? Mm-hmm. And he asked anyone that was in the audience, and he gave them a prompt to put in Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever. And he asked them to put in the same prompt in all the models, and they all came with a different answer. It was a puzzle. Do you remember that, John?
Yep.
He wasn't trying to be smart. The point he was trying to make was that every one of the models have come up with a different answer. So which one do you trust and which one is correct? So to me, we have the wider, environmental view outside of business in terms of, what AI and the dangers of it and the obvious dangers of it and how they can literally change the world and might very well change the world. But from a business point of view, I mean, I heard through a company we were talking to, and they were a banking institution, and they found evidence that some of their staff were putting loan applications through ChatGPT to process the information. Loan applications with private sensitive data, like social security numbers, addresses, date of births, because they didn't want to manually process the loan applications. I keep going back to this. It's so obvious to me in my head that management really, really, really need to get control of their strategy around this. And, they really need to get the people in, and I'm not talking about ourselves, but, and I am as well, but people who actually understand you're letting your staff loose on information that they can put out in the ether. And then you've lost control. They spend all this money on data breaches and GDPR, all the regulations, et cetera, all the fines. But until they really, 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 truly understand what AI is and what it can do and what it won't do, they shouldn't implement it. Like, it should not be implemented until there's a full analysis done. They can't just go with the hype, go with the wave. Oh, we all need to be AI because this other competitor of ours, we heard they're using AI, so we should be using it. I mean, I think it's so fundamentally wrong to do that.
That's interesting example. I think the other aspect is how can you tap into these technologies to help you do the things that you should have done already? There's an awful lot of AI capabilities that can be used to help make information more understood, to tag it more effectively, to categorize it more effectively, to organize it more effectively. Those things are pretty dramatic improvements for most organizations. And so, rather than, go down the path of the latest CEO bright shiny object, which is, I heard my competitor was doing this, and I think sometimes it might be a more productive thing to say, okay, there's a new set of capabilities, there's a new set of technologies out there. Which players in my vendor set are committed to going on this ride in a way that can help me get my information better under control? And for the short term, that would be an enormous benefit to go down that path.
It's the wasted time, though, isn't it, as well, John? I mean, did you ever sort of at AIIM or in your career get your head around or get some true numbers around how much time is wasted by staff? Is it 30% a day?
Yeah. There's the knowledge worker use case. There's the compliance and risk assessment use case. There's the security, use case. They're all relevant, and they all rest fundamentally on managing information in an intelligent way. I remember I talked to a company one point that remained nameless, and it was a Fortune 100 company. They had gotten at some point a ding along the way in the finance area that they ought to take a closer look at their information and how it's managed and do some sort of an audit of, the internal processes that they have for information. And, unlike, records managers that have been sort of saying this for 100 million years and then like banging at the door, they finally had like the CFO saying like, well, we have to do this because the auditor said we have to do this. And they took a look at it, and they were like 150 major different information repositories within that organization. A very successful organization, but none of them communicating with each other. None of them kind of, managed it in a really effective way. And that's the scope of the challenge that exists in organizations. And it's not going to be solved overnight. And it's not going to be solved by just pointing AI at it and hoping for the best.
No, that's for sure. That is for sure.
That brings us into our next or our final question, which is all about the future of information management. So, John, what is it that excites you most about the future of information management, and what concerns you? So we'll start off with what makes you feel excited. What are you looking forward to?
Okay. Excitement. I think I'd say two things that we've already really touched on a little bit. The first one is that the application of AI tools says to me that governance in an effective way at scale, not perfect, but at scale, is something that's within the grasp of organizations. God, we've been saying that for 100 million years, that it's important for organizations to do this. But I think that excites me, and that it kind of points at a future that doesn't seem as hopeless as it's always seemed in the past. And I say that with some reluctance, as somebody who tried to convince people otherwise for 25 years. The second thing is that I think it puts a highlight, if people are smart, on information management professionals, governance professionals, finally getting a seat at the big person's table. That hasn't always been the case.
Mm.
Those two things are exciting to me. Concerns, I think, as things accelerate at speeds that we never would have anticipated, I think the governance gap in many organizations is growing wider rather than narrower. The governance gap between people that have their act together and organizations that don't have their act together. And that's a lot of competitive threat, I think, for a lot of organizations that don't even realize that they have a problem. And it's going to make it very clear that they have a problem. And then the last thing, I do worry sometimes that we would always say when we did our training at AIM, we would talk about people, process, and technology as kind of the three anchors of the things that you need to do in order to be effective in an information management context. And the ironic part is that people would spend 80% on technology, they'd spend 15% on process and 5% on people, when it all should have been exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And there is some risk that people will go down that same path again. There's a lot of amazing things that AI tools can do. There's also a lot of catastrophic things they can do too, if you don't manage the people part and the process part right.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I've been hearing people, stories about young people not trusting AI or not liking AI, and have a very negative sort of connotation towards it. And so in our world, AI is kind of a couple of things, right? It's automatic classification of content, automating the metadata extraction of documents so that humans don't have to do it and don't get it wrong. And then it's that sort of idea of being able to ask questions about a bunch of documents together and get insights and things like that. So really, we're focused in a world where we're trying to make humans more efficient, right? We're trying to go and say, instead of wasting 30% of your day, just here's the information you need to do your job properly right now, and be confident and feel safe that you're dealing with the correct information. So we're not in that sort of world of trying to get rid of humans or anything. And I think it's been really fascinating, the young people coming in and being so anti it. I would have thought that would be the opposite.
It is a funny time right now, because, we used to say, I remember when we would talk to people about updating their systems to be more mobile aware and cloud aware and stuff like that. We'd say, young people come into our organizations based on the environment that they had in college, and they feel like they're coming into a computer museum when they go to work for most of, There's a little bit of a flip. I think you're right, Treve, going on right now, in that young people have more of an anxiousness about AI than I would have guessed, and I think some of that has to do with the impact that AI potentially has on entry-level white collar jobs in terms of how people get started. You start to see it now also manifest itself in a lot of the protests. I assume they're worldwide. I know they're present in the United States about data center and people spending inordinate amounts of money for data centers and power requirements and water requirements and all the rest of that stuff. Yeah. And anything that's that fundamental, there's going to be a thrashing out that we all go through as we figure it out.
It's been interesting for me coming into this industry in the last couple of years. Obviously, when AI really started to become a big topic is around the time that I started. And I came from a perspective of being very anti-AI. And a lot of what I'm seeing on social media and what people around me are feeling is very anti-AI. And my sister, for example, I was speaking to her about using AI to help her write a CV. And she's going, can't do that. I'm so anti-AI sort of thing. And I think it's about the use cases for it and the implications of what it is. I think a lot of the anti-AI stuff that I'm seeing in the media at the moment is because it's being used for creativity. It's being used for making music. It's being used for making art, video content, all of these things that have fueled the creative industries, and it's being used there as opposed to being used where it makes sense, like in business to make people more efficient. And that's why I'm very on the fence. I see the benefit of using AI in the business world, not to replace workers, but to help them be more efficient. And I 100% am against AI being used for creativity. And so people see AI as this one big overarching topic, but they're not seeing where it's actually a benefit.
I think over time, it's going to distill down into good and bad, right? And, that's what society is about, whether it be in business or in your personal life, in your social existence, in the world, global, everything. There'll be good and bad forms of it. Mackensie, I would actually totally agree with you. I think using AI in business for creative or those types of business functions, I would be totally against. Because I do think it takes the fabric of the next generation in terms of, the enthusiasm of going into like the National College of Art and Design or whatever studies that they did, knowing, hang on, do I have a job when I come out of here after studying for 4 or 5 years? And I can see why young people, but in the business context, if your business process is broken, it's broken, right? And AI will only make it worse because it'll just manifest it. The use of AI for very, very low value, menial tasks that aren't threatening, that actually free valuable resource up to do something that adds more value to an organization is where organizations should be focused. So processing invoices, that shouldn't be done manually this day and age. Who the hell wants to go and trawl through a line item and then transcribe it into an ERP? No one wants to do that, even if they're being paid. They just don't want to. These types of tasks, classifying a document or giving you a kind of a head start on a prompt. Is it a contract? Is it a HR document? Is it a compliant? There's nothing wrong with that. But fundamentally, I go back to the point. If your business process is broken, your business process is broken. And it's only a human or humans can fix it, right? They can only do the analysis, the wider macro view, the micro view, the economic view, the competitor view, et cetera, and go, why is this not working? Well, it's not working because we've got a big silo sitting in the middle. We've got the HR department that refused to push information in and send it back out. So we have to go around it with a bottleneck. It's a total bottleneck. If there's one thing from today, and, John has given a really insightful viewpoint around, coming from where you came from in terms of AIM, and we're trying to just profess this to the Irish organizations we're talking about, is don't just go and implement AI. You need to have a strategy that underpins it. What's the goals? How's it protected? What are you using it for? What should you not use it for? Have you documented your protocols around these things? Because if you haven't, forget about it. You shouldn't even be considering this. It's a very serious decision to make. And the ramifications are very serious if you get it wrong as well. And this is where I think the cybersecurity sales guy and us are now slightly on a par, because we don't want to be professing fear. But if organizations don't realize what they're letting loose, okay, into their data, so where someone can go and see John Mancini, CEO, oh, there's his employment contract and there's his salary and there's his reviews because the permissions weren't locked down. That's serious. That's very serious.
Mm.
So I think that I'm excited by the fact is that young people are starting to realize, actually, hang on, this is not such a good thing in certain things, and it is such a good thing in certain things. And it's the young people that will bring those viewpoints through to the silly older people who have this utopian notion that AI is going to make their tea in the morning, drive their car, well, it might drive their car, but drive their car and go and do everyone's job for them. That's just not the reality.
I think it so much goes to the huge scope of what these technologies ultimately are all about that makes it so hard to make those judgments about good and bad, worthwhile, not worthwhile, risky, not risky, all those kinds of things. The other thing, Mackensie, your point struck a chord with me, is that historically those early jobs that are now in some ways, we all hated them when we did them. Those early jobs were kind of how you learned the business. And if that on-ramp doesn't exist or is being truncated now, I think it's kind of frightening often to young people.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a personal confession, personal example of some of this. As a result of all the work I've done over the years in AIIM and kind of everything else, I have a pretty big database of information about the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I can have Claude write a blog post about just about any topic in the industry more effectively than I can write it.
Mm.
Now, what it also has is me reviewing it based on kind of all this years of experience of, if something goes off the rails, I'll kind of retweak it or redo this or do that or do the other thing. And on the one hand, as a information worker, I kind of look at that and say wow, that's just fabulous. I can be, 10 times more productive than I might otherwise have been. On the other hand, I think, yeah, it kind of creeps me out a little bit too. It kind of goes on that line between creative and rote that you were talking.
Yes.
And we're just going to have to sort through that.
Well, I'm going to ask Treve and John a question. See what you think. Okay. We have started in our organization using AI to analyze our sales calls. Let me put some context. They're consultative calls as well, but ultimately we are trying to bring an organization through to a point where we can do business with them and we'd like to partner with them. Do you think that's a good use of AI or a bad use of AI?
What is it analyzing? The actual call itself?
The sentiment, the signals that, maybe something that we should have said and didn't say. It's coaching us through with various parameters and their sales oriented parameters to ensure that we hit our key points that we need to hit at certain times.
Personally, I would just say, give it a shot. And then if it's helpful, great. If it's not, then dump it. Don't get overly enamored with it. But if it winds up being something that's useful, I have a little personal example that I was thinking about. I have a nephew who's in a senior sales position and he works remotely. And so they were on, like everybody, a gazillion Zoom calls, and somebody turned on the Zoom summary capability at some point to summarize the sales meeting. At first, my nephew thought oh, well, this will be pretty interesting to look at. And then he looked at the summary of the meeting and it went all the way down through all this. It says, Dan was asked a question and he had nothing to say. And he said, I'm not so sure I want that anymore. But,
yeah, no, exactly. Treve, what do you think?
I want to sort of touch on that, but also there's something I've just been thinking about listening to you very smart people talk, but it's the business and analyst sort of role that we play, right, that comes in as well. So if you sort of go and say, let's say we're at that conference and everyone's going, we want AI, we don't know how to do it. And we're going, well, we do, we know how you can do it. But that's a human aspect to it. It's the all of that knowledge that we've built up over 15 odd years each, Niall, of doing document management, John, you longer. Like we've got all this stuff in our brains, and even going back to your Claude example, John, that's based on it's that Picasso effect, right? It's that fact that, well, we've got all this knowledge that we built up over years, and that's why we can add value to these organizations that want to actually somehow solve these problems. And what I've been sort of thinking for a little while is that the in-person effect of going into an organization and actually getting a whiteboard and writing things up and looking at processes and building those processes then into workflow and M files and talking to humans, because humans do like to talk about their problems, and actually being able to go and say, we can help you. We've got the knowledge, the institutional knowledge. We know what we're doing. Our team is really great. We can come in there and we can help you be more efficient. And I think that's so not AI, right? That's preparing them for AI, but it's so human. And it's such a big part of what companies like DocSmart and Convergent actually do offer to our customers.
There is an AI relevance there too, because one thing that I've been impressed that AI tools can do is distill large volumes of information into comprehensible masses that I might not ordinarily look. So for example, I guess if you had a whole boatload of, sales reports or customer reports or, whatever, kind of all sorts of things like that. Not that you would trust it 100%, but if you would, I think there would be value in asking Claude or Copilot or something, what are the 5 or 6 major themes you see in kind of looking through these? Certainly you could do that one by one, little by little, but I think that is a helpful tool to get your arms around things.
Human intelligence, though, Treve, is what you're talking about. Like the human intelligence bit should always supersede. And funny, just something popped into my head. I don't know how this memory just popped into my head. My father was in the construction game all his life. Not educated, just was thrown in and building sites when he was 13, 14, and became educated in the industry through experience. Okay. And my brother went to college and did, I don't know, it was quantity surveying or some kind of soft-handed construction office job rather than the hard-handed. And I remember he came home from college in first year and he had all these drawings, these large format drawings in a tube, and he'd pull out the drawings and he's trying to figure out what's what in the drawing. My dad would just come in with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and go, oh, sure, that's that. His human intelligence that he built up over years, even though he had never seen a drawing in terms of in an education setting, he was able to tell my brother straight off the bat. He could read the drawing like he could read a sign on the wall. Yeah. And my brother was like, I remember his jaw was up. Dad, how do you know this? He goes, 45 years doing this. I know exactly what I'm doing, type of thing. And Treve, I think you're talking about the exact same thing. And I know when we go into organizations, we bring the kind of the human context to the technological capability that AI might bring. Yeah, that's a good idea, but had you considered this? Because you talked about these pitfalls. So I think that human aspect is probably the bit that, again, lending itself to the corporate level strategy is to bring people in who actually have an experience of what the opportunity is, but also what the dangers are too, and where you could use it, where you probably shouldn't use it.
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think that experience side, but also the humans like that. There's that idea that AI doesn't read a document and get context from it. It just predicts what the next word should be. So the context is in the human brains. It's like, well, I know this proposal relates to that project, but it relates to that client, and the client contact people are, and we did these other 5 projects for them, and Sally's son is Jim, and Jim works for them or something, whatever it might be. All that context that's built into the way humans might read a document, and AI just can't do that. It doesn't have that built in.
It's binary, yeah.
I think it's that whole fear aspect as well. Like, John, if you go back to some of those other major changes in the industry, I would imagine that at the start of all of those changes, there was a fear aspect from, whether it be the IT manager or the CFO or the CEO. We don't want to make the wrong decision here because it's going to cost us a lot of money, and it can be very difficult to turn around a large project. I always love that fail fast idea. Look, make a decision, do it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it, do something else. But when you get into corporate land, often the egos don't allow that to happen. They will keep going down the wrong path for sheer stubbornness. So I think at the moment that's probably happening again as well, that there's people out there that are going, we do want to be better. We do want to invest this money. We do see the value in doing it. How do we do it?
Just how do we do it?
Yeah. I think about the heyday of ECM and kind of like the idea that there would be one universal monolithic solution that would solve everything. And I can remember talking to companies at the time. I usually have kind of like an open-ended sort of question with them, like, well, tell me a little bit about your content management journey in your company and that kind of thing. And they say, well, we've been thinking about solutions now for 6 years, trying to be like, well, that's probably not the right approach. Odds are you haven't moved the ball forward. So somewhere in there, in certainty and risk taking is a balance that organizations need to take. When you have something as monolithic as AI, which reminds me a little bit of how monolithic we used to think ECM would be. It's kind of like a useless question to talk about it in the abstract. You need to talk about it in what context, in what people context, in what process context, and what are you trying to do as a business, and how do you judge success in your business? And that's where having solution providers that can help people make that match, that understand enough about the business that can help them match the technology capabilities to what they're trying to do.
Mm.
That's a hard thing to find. And you find a partner that can do that. That's very valuable because it's a complicated world out there right now.
Well, it is, and there are different products. Of course, there's different generative AI assistants that people are trying to sort of grapple with. And if you're in a Microsoft world, you gravitate towards Copilot, of course, right? Another slight change of topic. One thing I've found really fascinating in my journey in information management is this idea that we've got our file server with all our network folders, and we're going to modernize and we're going to move it into SharePoint Online. And that's our modernization of our information management strategy, which is to basically shift all your current problems into the cloud, Interestingly, once again, at this conference we were at, we're talking to some very large organizations, and a natural question is, what enterprise content management system are you using? None. They're all using SharePoint. It's not like they've gone to an ECM and it's failed and they've come out of it. They've just never went there. They basically took their file server and plonked it in the cloud and called it modernization. It was quite fascinating, really.
Or they adopted something that was process specific, and they don't even think about it as being ECM. They adopted an AP automation solution. They adopted a contract management solution. They adopted a process solution and didn't really almost even think that this had applicability to other solutions that they were trying to do. Yeah, we used to ask that question, how many ECM solutions do you have on surveys that we did at AIM? And I always thought it was a pretty bad question, frankly. Even though I crafted it, I couldn't think of any other way to craft it. But it used to come back 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I kind of thought they're probably overstating and understating the nature of the problem, because there's a lot of SharePoint in there probably, and a lot of process-specific solutions floating around all over the place.
But just to finish, John, actually a point you made about the scenario about an organization and, they're 6 years down the line and they still haven't done anything. I go back to a point I made earlier on, was that if that was a cybersecurity threat that they'd identified, right, that would have been closed off within 6 days.
Yep.
The money would have been absolutely released to close off that threat. And I'm flabbergasted that, that organizations don't see that the content and information that they've built up over years, that they don't see that that's worth so much more than the risk of a cyber data breach. It's astounding. And I think that until such time as that kind of mindset exists, it's going to be, I think an ECM or a document or M files or whatever it might be is always going to be classified as a nice to have, but it actually should be a business critical enabler in this day and age.
You have human assets, you have business assets, you have financial assets, and you have information assets. And you have to manage the latter with the same kind of intelligence and discipline that you do all the rest of them.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, actually, think about that 6 years. Think about 6 years of wasted money. We all know that if you implement a really good information management system, it's going to save you a lot of money. Niall said on one of our podcasts, he said when ROI comes up, he loves that conversation because the answer is the way you're doing it now is the most expensive way you could be doing it. It was a good one.
But it's true.
Yeah.
Nowhere to go but up.
But of course, as a driver, you're doing it the most expensive way right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's 6 years of wasted savings. Forrester have just brought out a new total economic impact of M-Files that shows a 301% return on investment. That's a no-brainer right there, right? Let's just spend some money and get 301% return on investment. I mean,
yep.
And actually, Cheryl McKinnon from Forrester was in Dublin recently as well. She was speaking.
I was going to say, was that Cheryl's study?
I don't know if it was, but I'm sure she was part of it because her findings in Dublin were very, very interesting. Obviously, Forrester are an independent research company. One of our last slides, John, I don't know if you remember this, it was that context is king in this day and age. Forrester have recognized that context is the important aspect that's required in terms of managing information and documentation. If any organization has aspiration to use AI, whether it be for a good reason or a bad reason. Cheryl on her last slide said that their analyses that they've done is that context is the key aspect and metadata as well. They mentioned metadata and context are the two elements that are really the foundation stones in terms of the way document management needs to move forward.
But we provide that, don't we, Niall?
We do provide it. But there was a bit of a segue. But yes, we do. I had to say Forrester. It was from Forrester and it was from Cheryl McKinnon, so it was independent, but it does align with the way M-Files it's bread and butter, the way it's set up. It's always been set up that way,
Mm.
Cheryl's one of the solid characters out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, her presentation was excellent in Dublin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John.
Anytime. It was cool.
We'll have to have you back sometime if you're up for it.
Anytime. It's just, as a matter of fact, at the stage in life where my wife and I are always looking at where's the next place to go. And I was, as a matter of fact, just this morning, I was thinking, okay, let's see. How far away is Auckland? How far away is... Well, this was really fun, and I appreciate the invitation. So thank you.
No, thank you so much for being here. We've really appreciated it. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye,
Thank you, John. See you, Treve.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.